Well, hello and bonjour, guten Tag. Today I'm actually recording this from Switzerland, and I want to start with something that we will do in the 2D world and then take that into 3D. And in this particular case it will be some sort of a texture. There will be just a pattern, maybe a plaid pattern or something, and there will also have holes in it. So I want to show how you can have the alpha channel mapped onto the material property to punch holes into the 3D object. And we'll just put that on a sphere to make it very simple as a starter, but it'll show the basic concept and how to go about this. So let's start by creating an image. Let's make it relatively quick and easy, 512 by 512 square, and that would be this, right? And I'm using Dog Waffle here, but feel free to use your own paint program. You can get Dog Waffle for next to nothing these days. There's a couple of free versions and a couple of more elaborate latest editions. This one here is version 8.2 alpha, not quite released yet, but close enough for what we want to do. So what I'll do is I'll render a filter. Let's see here, plasma noise for instance. Let's make it one of the colorful ones, a little bit smaller. Yeah, let's give it with this and keep that for now. I'll keep a safe copy here. And then I also save that. I'll go and store that actually with the general file converter, because we've seen that that will save it with a BMP format or header that actually is compatible with 3D Animator. So, Animator. So what we'll do is we'll save it that way as a BMP. We could also save it as a JPEG. I guess it doesn't really matter so much. Let's call this one test 2. You see I've done this before here. I'll call this test 2, and it will be the color channel, so 2C. In fact, the one thing we might want to do is make it symmetrical on the edges, so it's tileable, right? So there is a thing here called make seamless. I think that was introduced in version 8. There's an option you may have in your earlier version under the brush menu, but you'd have to first copy this, pick it up as a brush, and that's easy, and then you can go and turn it seamless just the same way. Here I'm just working from the main buffer where the image is located, and I'll just use the default settings and simply click OK and put that back in here. So now this structure or this image is seamless, and we wouldn't see a sudden cut from one end to the other. We'll do a seamless transition if we tile it. And if we wrap it around the sphere in particular, we'll see no sudden cut or seam around the backside where it's coming back together. Alright, so we'll simply save that one just like I did here before. I guess we could have done that earlier. Save it, and this one here will save the color version, override this, so that's the seamless version. Will work with that. Now another thing we also want to do is punch some holes, and for that what I'll do is let's jump to the swap buffer, and we'll put some holes in there simply by drawing them. This could be done maybe with a brush, like a simple brush, medium or large, and punch a couple of holes around here, or drag it and draw it. Or maybe something a little bit more regular shaped and spaced. Maybe something like, let's go render again and look for the, what do we have? Brick textures, grids. Some of these checkerboards that might look pretty good. Let's give it a checkerboard that's 40 by 40. That's the default layout. Maybe even a little bit less. No, let's keep it like that. But we'll make it higher contrast. So we'll give it bright color here and then really dark black on the other. Right. So now we have this, and what we want to do is maybe more like roundish shape. So one thing we can do is filter it, blur it. Let's do a Gaussian blur, and then go to another filter and adjust it for the threshold. So now we have either all black or all white, or somewhere in between. And because of the blurring we did, it actually has a transition that's not a pure square shape like it was here, but we can go something close to circles. And I will make a couple of dimple dots here. That's what I'm trying to get to. Now we could invert it, we could let's keep it like that. We may need to have an inverted version and see if that one works better, because remember, this is going to be an alpha channel. This is going to be used as a mask to cut holes And so is this going to represent opacity or the inverse of it, which is transparency? Some programs will interpret the white parts as what you see, and others will interpret the black parts as what you see and the white parts as what is transparent. So depending on whether this is interpreted as an opacity or as a transparency, the application may need the inverse of the image. Right? So one thing to do is to store this one and then also invert it and store the other one. So we have now two versions, and we'll save them both, right? So we'll take this one first. By the way, if we want to look at this in the alpha channel, you could simply copy that to the alpha channel, but we don't really need that. We know what it's gonna do and how it's gonna work there. We may want to make it seamless there too. So let's see that. Well, that's a bit of a cut here. I mean, it's okay. We can use that, and then perhaps there you go, and then do another transition. But yeah, that's where you see this grayish transition as the blurring effect, as it blends the seamless tiles, so the edges. We'll use that. That'll be fine. So now let's go and save that again through the general file converter and save this one as a BMP also. So that test2, but it's not the C color channel. We'll change that. Let's make sure we see that here as we capture it to A, and this one we'll call the original, and it's BMP, and then we'll grab this one. This one I did not make seamless, and so what we'll do is we'll save this one and say general file converter, and we'll save it. And it'll be very similar to the one we just saved earlier, but this one, instead of 2A, we'll call it 2A INV for inverted or something like that. And strictly speaking, it's not really the same as 2A inverted because we did not make this one seamless. You know, let's have both just to try and experiment with it and see which one we like better. Alright, so this time we're done on the 2D side, and it's time to launch Animator. And I'm going to put it right here. Capture that. Same size, and the thing I will do is first I'll create the material, right? In Animator you can create the objects first, and then you think, well, okay, how am I going to make this look like it's carrying these dimple dots and patterns and other textures, and start worrying about the material. But you can really work on the material side first if you want to, and then you know what you've got available, and then as you create the models, be it a spaceship or an elephant or whatever it is you're modeling, you can always then go back to those materials you know you've already created. Alright, so one thing I'll do here is I'll hit enter. When you hit enter, it opens the material dialog. And there's probably a couple of other ways to look at it, probably here somewhere. You know what, yeah, there it is, component material. Well, we don't have an object right now selected, so that's not going to be the case. But we have the material dialog here. Enter is the toggle for materials. Oh yeah, and here you have another one too. This one here is a shortcut for that. So let's go and double click a new material property here. This is a placeholder for a material property. We don't have any others yet here, and what this one will do is allow me to create a new one, and I'll give it a name. It's easier to work with that and to recognize it later. So I'll call it dimple dots, or dimple holes actually, dimple holes 1. And in order to make it appear with those dimples, there's a couple of places where we could work. One is the diffuse pattern here. The diffuse channel of this shader can work with a texture that we can load right here. So that would be used most typically for the color channel, right? So we need to go and find where I've saved that under Animator, and I think it's under Textures. Yep, there it is. So there was texture 2A, B, and this color channel. There it is. That's the bitmap, and I can save that. I can open that rather, and load it in. So now I have this test2C color, and I can make that the one. I can choose that. Right now here I just loaded a texture. It's not actually applied to that shader yet, but now I can select that, and I am currently in the texture selection mode for the diffuse channel, and bingo, it's there. So I have now a diffuse channel there. Now I'm not seeing it because I'm not applying it, but I'm seeing it here in the channel. So in the preview. So one thing that would be useful is of course to have an object like a sphere. Let's go and insert a sphere and put that there, and then actually we should always see it perhaps in shaded mode or flat or smooth shaded mode. There you go. And then also one thing, a good habit to take here is to locate and center it about the origin, so that way it's kind of nicely centered. Alright, immediately you can go to Control-Shift-R to rotate it around and look at it in a user-defined view that you see here, or you can go back to front if you prefer. Alright, so now let's go and apply this shader. How do we apply the material? Well, simply you can double-click the object. Right, and when you double-click the object, you can see the items or the object's properties, the basic properties of the object. And in particular, the material, the name here too, that was given automatically, but the name of the material, and you can go and select the one we've just created here. We named it Dimple Holes 1, and there is the name. So let's choose that and apply it. So you see a preview here that has that material, the texture already applied. And sure enough, not much of a seam visible on the outside. It's pretty nice. One thing you could do though is a little bit better on the smoothing. Let's say we view this in smooth shading. The shading is smooth, but the geometry is still very coarse, and you can see just around here, for instance, there's a nice little dot, or I mean an angular change, because it's very coarse. So double click it and you'll see that you can give it a little bit more longitude, latitude lines, higher refinement. Maybe double that, 24, and latitude 8, 16. Oh, let's go to 20, why not? Give it a little bit more there too. So that looks a little bit more like a sphere now. And we can focus, therefore, concentrate a little bit more on what's going on with the texture without being distracted or sidetracked by the imperfections of the geometry. It's a little bit better now on the smoothness of that sphere, so if there's any imperfections that are coming from the texture, we'll be better able to see those as well. Now the next thing we want to do is apply those transparencies, those holes, right, the dimple dots. And to that effect, we'll go back to the shader. So I'll double click the shader here, and there's really other things we need to do here. There's a general transparency we could put here to 0 to make it very transparent or fully transparent. But there's really more of a gradual or a spatial transparency we're interested in, not an overall transparency where everything is, let's say, 0.2. If we do that, it's very transparent. It's like almost like glass. And you can see the specular highlight reflecting here on the outside and here on the inside as well. And then from the other light, there's 2 light sources here, at least. There could be even more. Yeah, there's probably 2. But that's not what we want on the material. We want a transparency that is, fully opaque. And again, that looks like it's rather an opacity rather than a transparency. But we want that opacity all over. And then we'd really like to use a textures, and we can go here to do that. Let's go with the textures to refine the transparency as a texture, as an image that we lay on it, right? And so that's what we'll do here with this transparency entry. We'll go and select that from another texture. So right now we had only loaded one, the color texture, so let's load another one. This texture will be the dimple patterns. So let's get the one here where it's all white and a couple of black dots. Let's see if that's the good one. And if that's not the right one, we'll take the opposite one with the inverted image. So let's take this one first and open that. And we'll now select it. Remember, 2C is the color channel, 2A is the alpha channel image. There you go. And one thing you can also do is to set the mode, the MD. I think that stands for material description or mode or whatever, decal maybe. That's the default mode. You can have a other preview that, but the preview here should help us quite nicely. And then when we apply that, we will see applied on the object. Alright, so that's actually the one I was looking for. So we've got the holes. Let me zoom in a little bit so we can see that better. There you go. So as you rotate, you can see through those openings. And that's basically what we wanted to do, is to have an alpha channel in the material so that we can have some cuts and openings through that thing. Now we could also do this in a different direction, which is to, rather than having a couple of dots and holes, have everything around it be the transparent part. And now that's really easy. You just double click that, you go to the textures again, and instead of loading the 2A, we'll need the inverted version of that. Right? So what we'll do is we'll go there, and load that texture that we also know exists there. That's this one, the 2A inverted. And we could, by the way, here invert the image, but that inverts not the colors of the image. It inverts it flips the X and the Y, the width along the width and height. So it actually is would potentially change the location of where these things are. So let's go and select the inverted one here, and keep everything the same. We have now a preview here of the fact that it's going to be opaque on the dots and transparent on the inside. This would be a different way to look at it, and this a different way as well. But we want the decal because that's really going to impose the opacity channel that way. And so now we've got the other way to use this, and that's with just a couple of, mostly transparent surface and a couple of colors showing wherever it was opaque. Now the mask we had created was either all or nothing, right? Remember the image we had here in Dog Waffle, it was just either black or white. And there will be cases where you really want something in between as well, and you can, because this is not just a 1-bit channel. This is not either just black or white. It's a 8-bit value, and the RGB value, or in this case actually just black and white, so if we copy that into the alpha channel, it's 8 bits. It can have gray values in between. In fact, you could have started from this image and turned that to a gray image, maybe from the image menu here, grayscale, exposing it to a particular color channel of a color, a colored lens, and you would have a gray scale with many different gray values. You can zoom into that, and you see some are very dark like this here, and some are bright like these here, and anything in between happens there. You get a lot of different gray values. So that would translate into transparency values that are very dispersed. You have some very dark spots, very opaque or very transparent ones, and then you have very bright spots, and those would be the opposite, very transparent or very opaque ones. Same thing with those dots, by the way. You could go and this and perhaps blur it again. Remember we had started from this and then blurred it and then threshold, but we can blur it again from here and make it something like this. If we want the contrast to be a bit better, we can do the expansion to the dynamic range to be totally. Well, there has to be some black pixels, there have to be some white ones there too now, and there's anything in between. And so let's go save that, and this one will save the same way with the general file converter. And so here's a quick preview, then we can go and save that, and we'll call it like this here, test2A, but we'll call it special or gray or smoothed or something like that, because we did some blurring, right? So we have that image there, and now we can go back to loading our maybe a different material. Let's create a different material. This one here will leave the colors unchanged, but we'll focus just on the transparency. So let's go to the texture menu here, and we'll go to the transparency mask, and we need to load a new texture. And that texture is of course this one here with the smoothed part. And let's go and see that. So here's the smooth. Let's choose it and make sure that we also go and select the mode. Make sure it's a decal, view that. I think that's all good to go. And let's go save it and apply that. So now we haven't applied it yet. We still have this texture as the one that's applied to that object. Now we could go and perhaps create another object and add that. Or we can change the material that's used on this object. So double click this object to see again the materials and the other details, and choose a different material. Now we have material 1. This one here was named material 1 by default. There it is. We might want to change that, by the way. So let's go and look at it, double click it there, and say this is smooth dot. So smooth holes 1, and so we've got this one here, dimple holes, this one is smooth holes, and what we'll do is we'll double click the object and select smooth holes. There you go. And so now we have sort of a smooth transition of partly transparent, partly opaque. And you see we don't do any color changes because we didn't mess with that, we didn't change the color parts of it, but you can definitely tell that we're looking through some parts in a semi-smooth, semi-transparent way, and that's because we have some gray values there. It's not just all transparent or fully opaque. It does have some ways to go in between. Now, how much of that you get and whether you get more of it, that's really something you can control. You can control at two levels. One is you can control it at the program like Dog Waffle, where you create this image in the first place. Right? If you wanted it to be more transparent, since the transparency part is probably where it's black here, what you may want to do is make it darker. Right? You could apply a filter here, for instance, to adjust the value, and you could go and perhaps reduce the brightness there, or increase and reduce, or there's a couple of contrasts you could change here to simply make it essentially go more into the darker area, and that would probably give you more of the more visibility, more transparency through those. Let's go save that and verify that. So let's go save with the general file converter, and this one will save to almost the same name, but instead of smoothed, we'll call this smoothed 2. Alright, and let's go back to our animator program, and this time we'll go load another texture, and we're still working on the transparent part, I think, but we'll load this one here. Instead of the smoothed, we'll go and load the smooth 2, which is not showing here yet, so I guess we need to get out of this and load that again. So maybe this will do it here. Double click, textures, open that. Oh, load texture. We need to go load the texture first before we can see it in that list, of course. So let's go here. There's the smoothed 2. Open that. So now we got smoothed 2, and we got there, and we got there, and okay that. So now you can see that the transparency has increased, and we can see through that. So that's one place where you can adjust how much transparency you actually get. There are some other places, and that would be probably right here in the material property itself. If you look at transparency here, if you gave it a 0.1 or 0.4, well, it doesn't do much here because it's actually not controlling it as a global transparency overall. It's instead controlling it through the texture. So we'll keep this one as 1 and set the texture, and here we can say how much transparency we want. And let's say if we say half transparency, let's see if that has any effect. Yeah, it's actually less transparent now. So that transparency mask that we had applied goes only so far, but on top of that it gets modulated by that 50% transparency value that we have on that transparency channel right there. So if we say we have only 10% or 20%, it's even less impact. Right? So now it's very little transparency, barely visible there. And that's one place where you can certainly work to give it a little bit more transparency or less transparency than what the image itself already conveys. Right? So this percentage here kind of multiplies or applies to whatever the image says. The image brings it in on a spatial distribution basis, and this one here then modulates it to be more or less of that. I wonder if you can go higher. Let's give it 200%. I don't know if that actually does multiply. I don't think it does. So here's 200%. I think that's the same level as what we had at 100%. So it clamps it out. I would think so. Let's see. Yeah, see, it truncates it back to 100. Alright, so but one thing else you can do also is the MD, the mode, for that particular texture to be mapped on the transparency channel. What you can do is record this or use it as a darkening mode or as a lightening mode, and it may have an impact on how much of that transparency you actually get. I don't really know if it does. Doesn't look like it does. So for this particular use of the texture, we'll probably stick with simply the transparency at mode decal, because that one I understand what it does. We could use it perhaps on something else. We could have diffuse, specular highlights, emissive. The diffuse is the most natural way. We could actually put the same one there, or perhaps have the original, where is it there, the color channel, map that there, And so now put that one in, perhaps darken. That's a little bit too dark. Bright, that's too bright. Let's give it as a decal, so that will impose the colors from that image, and that should basically be it. And there you go. So now you have what you have now is really exactly that color distribution from one channel, from one image, and then the transparency mask from another image. And that concludes that quick intro on how to map colors, how to get a texture from a file into the diffuse or color channel, and then have a separate one which perhaps contains the same image or a different image, but make that go into bringing some transparencies, like carve out some holes or shapes so that some parts of it is fully transparent or gradual transparency, which is what you can see here in this particular example. But thanks for watching, and hope to see you soon again later on another tutorial.